There are people who don't have friends. And it's not because they're unfriendly, cold, or unable to socialize. So why does it happen? Why do they end up lonelier the smarter they seem? What if the problem isn't your personality, but how your mind works? There's a little-known psychological pattern that explains why some people understand others too well. And precisely because of that, they end up isolated. Stick around because understanding this completely changes how you view your loneliness. From the moment you interact with other people, your mind doesn't rest. You don't just listen to words, you observe gestures, silences, minimal changes in facial expression. While others experience the conversation, you analyze it. You review what was said, what wasn't said, and what could have been interpreted differently. It's not an obsession. It's how your brain processes social information. After each encounter, your mind goes back. You replay phrases, tones, pauses. You wonder if a response was too short, if a glance lasted longer than usual, if a comment changed the mood. This pattern is known as hyperactive social monitoring, a constant attention to social cues with the goal of anticipating mistakes and avoiding rejection. The intention is to protect yourself. At some point, you learned that a small social misstep could have big consequences. So, you developed permanent vigilance. You analyze before speaking, correct while speaking, and review after speaking. The problem is that this process consumes mental energy and reduces spontaneity. While others connect through presence and naturalness, you connect through control. And control, while it provides security, weakens closeness. Calculated responses, measured pauses, and constant self-correction create an invisible barrier. You don't say anything wrong, but you also don't fully reveal yourself. From the outside, this attitude is perceived. People feel that something is being evaluated. They don't know what, but they sense it. The conversation loses fluidity. The relationship becomes more formal, more distant. Not because you're cold, but because your attention is divided between being present and monitoring everything. Here, a central paradox appears. The smarter your social analysis, the less space you leave for spontaneous connection. Human connection needs imperfection, uncalculated moments, small errors that generate closeness. But when everything passes through the filter of thought, that imperfection disappears. The intelligence that allows you to understand others can also isolate you from them, not because you don't know how to relate, but because your mind turns every interaction into a silent examination. And when presence is replaced by analysis, the connection begins to weaken without anyone knowing exactly why. Over time, you develop a particular sensitivity to artificiality. It's not about distrust, but perception. You recognize when a laugh is automatic, when enthusiasm is exaggerated to fit in, when a promise is made without any real intention of being kept. While others accept these signals as a normal part of coexistence, for you, they are impossible to ignore. This ability has an immediate effect. Faking it becomes exhausting. Participating in conversations you know aren't sincere causes you deep discomfort. The little social theater, smiling out of politeness, showing interest out of obligation, validating opinions you don't share, starts to feel like a betrayal of your own internal consistency. It's not pride, it's an allergy to what's fake. Here arises the clash with modern social dynamics. Many relationships are sustained by a certain amount of acting, not because people are bad, but because group harmony often depends on softening truths, exaggerating affinities, or overlooking contradictions. You don't play that game, and when you don't, you stand out. From the outside, this stance is interpreted in different ways. Some perceive you as intense, others as difficult to read. There are those who feel your presence uncomfortably elevates the level of conversation. Not because you criticize, but because you don't automatically confirm what they expect to hear. This trait also creates distance because it exposes something many prefer to keep hidden: the need for approval. When you don't return the usual validation, when you don't reinforce the image someone is trying to project, you generate a feeling of insecurity. And in the face of insecurity, the most common reaction is to pull away. The result is silent. There's no direct confrontation. You simply stop being invited. Conversations shorten. Contact fades. You remain the same. But the environment becomes less accessible. Not because you've changed, but because you no longer participate in the implicit exchange that sustains many relationships. The paradox is clear. The more authentic you are, the less compatible you become with bonds built on appearance. You're not difficult. You're precise. You're not cold. You're consistent. But in an environment where falseness lubricated connection, your honesty ends up isolating you without anyone naming it. You've learned not to need anyone. When a problem arises, you solve it alone. When something hurts, you process it in silence. When you feel confused, you analyze until you find an internal answer. You don't ask for help. You don't seek comfort. You don't share doubts unless it's strictly necessary. This emotional self-sufficiency has allowed you to survive, but it has also changed how others relate to you. From the outside, you seem strong, stable, even imperturbable. You don't complain, you don't depend, you don't collapse. And while that inspires respect, it also generates an uncomfortable feeling in those around you. People usually approach when they feel they can be useful, when they perceive that their presence adds something. With you, that space hardly exists. This pattern is related to what psychology calls an avoidant attachment style. Not because you reject others, but because you learned that emotional dependence was risky. At some point, trusting or showing vulnerability didn't work out. So you developed a different strategy, always supporting yourself. The problem is that relationships are not built only on admiration, but on interdependence. Sharing fragility creates closeness. Asking for support builds a bond. But when you never do, the message that reaches the other person is clear, even if unintentional. I don't need you. And when someone feels they are not needed, they stop investing emotional energy. This is how disconnection occurs. There are no arguments or reproaches. Simply, contact is reduced. Conversations become functional. Closeness dissipates. You remain there, solving, moving forward, sustaining yourself. Others move away without drama, convinced that they are not needed. Here appears another painful paradox. You may desire company, but your self-sufficiency blocks it. Not because you don't want anyone close, but because you don't know how to open space without feeling like you're losing control. Your strength becomes an invisible barrier. Emotional independence is valuable, but taken to the extreme, it comes at a cost. When no one can help you, no one feels like part of your inner world. And even if you don't seek it, that distance eventually translates into loneliness. Not because you are irrelevant as a person, but because you don't allow others to be relevant to you. And in a world where connection is born from shared need, that absolute self-sufficiency leaves you alone, even when people are around. There's something you rarely do, even though it would facilitate many relationships: adopting an opinion just to fit in. You don't repeat ideas because they're trendy. You don't get indignant by reflex. You don't applaud what the group celebrates if you don't feel it's authentic. Your thinking doesn't seek to belong. It seeks to be consistent. And that difference, though subtle, puts you outside the center. Most social bonds are built on imitation. Sharing tastes, repeating phrases, agreeing on quick judgments creates an immediate sense of unity. It's not superficiality. It's a human shortcut to belonging. But you don't take that shortcut. You analyze before adopting, question before accepting. And when something doesn't make sense to you, you simply don't incorporate it. This trait is associated with low social conformity. You don't need others to validate your criteria to feel secure. However, in group contexts, that independence introduces friction, not because you openly confront, but because you don't reinforce the common narrative. Your silence where others nod, or your question where others celebrate, alters the balance. From the outside, the reaction is often ambiguous. There's respect, even admiration, but also distance. Your presence forces people to think, and thinking is tiring when what's sought is quick affinity. For many, closeness comes from feeling reflected, not questioned. And when they can't see themselves in you, they take a step back. Over time, you occupy a peripheral place. You're not expelled, but not fully integrated either. You're present, but not inside. You're consulted for clarity, not for company. You're listened to, but not included. Intellectual honesty earns you credibility, but it costs you intimacy. Here appears the silent cost of thinking for yourself. Maintaining your own criteria protects you from being diluted in the group, but it reduces opportunities for connection based on repetition and consensus. It's not that you don't value people, it's that you're not willing to sacrifice your thoughts to keep them. The paradox is clear. The more faithful you are to your mind, the further you move from dynamics that reward uniformity. Not because you're superior, but because you function differently. And in environments where belonging is built by copying, independent thinking unintentionally turns you into an outsider. You care more than you show. When someone close to you suffers, you perceive it immediately. You analyze the situation, look for causes, think of solutions. Your way of caring is practical, silent, geared towards solving problems. But you rarely express what you feel with words. Not because the emotion doesn't exist, but because that's not how you learn to show it. Your mind prioritizes logic even in emotional contexts. Faced with someone else's problem, you offer clarity. Faced with a crisis, you provide structure. You believe that helping means improving the situation. However, for many people, emotional support doesn't start with a solution, but with validation. They need to feel understood before they feel accompanied. Here the mismatch arises when someone shares their pain and receives analysis instead of explicit empathy. They might interpret that you don't care. Not because you're cold, but because your affection doesn't follow the expected script. Where others expect words, you deliver actions. Where others seek comfort, you offer direction. This pattern is often related to difficulties in identifying and expressing emotions in real time. It's not an absence of emotion, but a slower internal processing. You feel deeply, but you do so internally. By the time you're ready to verbalize it, the moment has passed, and the other person has drawn their own conclusions. From the outside, this translates into distance. People doubt. They wonder if you truly care, if you're emotionally present, if there is space for shared vulnerability. And in doubt, many choose to withdraw. There are no reproaches or confrontations, just a gradual disconnection. The tragic thing is that you continue to feel the same. The affection doesn't disappear, but by not being visible, it ceases to be perceived. And in human relationships, what is not perceived is often assumed to be non-existent. You are not indifferent. You simply express care in a way that few recognize. But in an environment that demands clear and quick signals, your emotional silence works against you. Unintentionally, you end up losing connections you valued, not for lack of feeling, but for lack of translation. When these traits combine, loneliness doesn't appear as an isolated event. There's no final argument or clear breakup. What happens is more silent, a sum of small distances, of misunderstandings that are never clarified, of bonds that cool without anyone knowing exactly when it started. Not because you did something wrong, but because you function in a way that doesn't easily fit with the majority. Seeing too much, analyzing too much, needing little, thinking for yourself, and feeling in silence comes with a social price. It's not a character flaw, it's a consequence. In a world that prioritizes quick validation, imitation, and immediate emotional expression, Depth often feels uncomfortable, and the uncomfortable rarely stays close. Psychology is clear on one thing: you're not broken. Your mind isn't failing. It simply operates with different parameters. Where others seek to belong, you seek consistency. Where others connect from the surface, you connect from the depths. That reduces the quantity of relationships, but it doesn't invalidate their value. Accepting this doesn't mean resigning yourself to being alone, but understanding why certain dynamics never worked for you. It means stopping forcing yourself to fit into spaces that demand versions of you that you are not. Loneliness, in this context, is not always a punishment. Sometimes it's the result of not betraying yourself. The final question isn't why you have few friends, but what kind of connection you are willing to accept. Because when you recognize your own frequency, you stop looking for companionship in places where there was never any space for it. And at that moment, loneliness stops feeling like a failure and begins to be understood as a conscious choice.